It's often, I think, the case that people will look at the Emirates from outside and they'll think, oh, it's desert and sand and camels. There was nothing before the oil, and when the oil runs out, there'll be nothing left after the oil. This is not the case. In the Emirates, we do have a history that is fascinating, and it goes back a long way. We have massive stone structures that are older than the pyramids. I'm going to deal a little bit with issues related to trade and innovation ideas, which are three fundamental aspects of UAE history over the past 125,000 years.
Welcome to the launch event of our newly formed Cambridge University Emirati Society. I would like to thank everyone for coming and joining us this evening to celebrate the formation of the society. My name is Mejd Alsari. I'm the founder and president of the society, and I'm a postdoc at the Cavendish Lab, that is the Department of Physics here at the University of Cambridge, and I work on materials for solar energy applications. So what we're trying to do through the society is a number of things. We would like to promote understanding of and interest in the Emirati and Gulf culture, heritage, and art amongst the members of the University of Cambridge. We would also like to bring together members of the University of Cambridge and elsewhere who share an interest in learning about the UAE and Gulf region, and encourage cross-cultural communication and understanding. We would also like to provide support for Emirati students studying in Cambridge, to connect with other UAE and Gulf societies in the UK and around the world, and most importantly, create a platform to discuss important topics to the UAE and the Gulf region, specifically something that I'm very passionate about, as well as the other committee members, scientific research, focusing on creating a culture of accessible research in the region. And so with that, we will be organizing and hosting events including lectures, panel discussions, workshops, socials, and other activities that fall within the scope of the society's objectives. So let me tell you a bit about how did we come up with the idea for this event. So we thought, okay, what would be the best way to show people what the UAE is? And I came across this documentary series on the history of the Emirates going back 125,000 years and culminating in the country's union in 1971. So we thought, how nice would it be to do a preview of the documentary and then have a panel discussion on the archaeological discoveries presented in the movie. Long story short, we couldn't get authorization to screen the movie, but then we decided to do talks instead. Nonetheless, since we will be talking about history, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge a man who believed in the importance of culture and heritage in the UAE's development. The founding father of the UAE, the late Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, who used to say, "He who does not know his past cannot make the best of his present and future, for it is from the past that we learn." I would like to thank our sponsor, Al-Unood Al-Abdul, from the Department of Foreign Assistance Affairs at the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, and the UAE Embassy in London. I also would like to thank members of the Trucial Oman Scouts Association for attending. They played a key role in the history of the UAE by serving as a security force for the area that was later to become the UAE. And they were kind enough to agree to display some of their work during that period from books and photographs in the foyer area outside the auditorium. And now let me tell you a bit about the structure of this event. So we will have 3 talks. And after each talk, we're going to have a Q&A, and then we're going to have the networking session. And now I will introduce our first speaker, Peter Hellyer. Born in the UK, he has been a resident of Abu Dhabi for over 40 years and was granted UAE citizenship in 2010 for his services to knowledge of the country's archaeology and history. He's an advisor at the UAE's National Media Council, and he's author and editor or co-editor of nearly 20 books on the UAE's archaeology, history, and environment. Between 1992 and 2005, Peter founded and then managed the Abu Dhabi Islands Archaeological Survey, ADIAS, which discovered some of the most significant historical sites in the region. These included the 1,400-year-old Christian monastery on the island of Ser Beniyas and the 7,500-year-old Neolithic village on the island of Mrawah, where the oldest pearl yet found on an archaeological site has subsequently been discovered, which he will be telling us about in his talk titled, Not Just Deserts, but 9,000 Years of Trade. Please help me give a warm welcome to Peter Hellyer.
Thank you, Mejd. I chose the title, Not Just Deserts, but 9,000 Years of Trade, because something that's become apparent to me over the years, and it will be apparent certainly, or will have been apparent, to Emiratis in the audience and to TOS veterans in the audience and other people who've lived and worked in the UAE, that the idea that it's, desert, sand, oil wells and not much else is a tiny little part of the truth. There is much, much more to the UAE than that. And I hope to skim over some of the aspects of UAE history that demonstrate that, or that to my mind demonstrates it. Mejd read extracts from Sheikh Zayed, and I should acknowledge that his interest was fundamental to the encouragement of the study of the history and archaeology, the preservation of its culture over the last 45 years, and it remains a priority in terms of government. The phrase that Mejd just read out, it was something that he passionately felt. He had a genuine, deep interest in the origin of his country and of its people and of their history and heritage. And I will get on to that a little bit more later. You know where it is, I hope. That's broadly where we are, southeastern Arabia, southern end of the Arabian Gulf. And when looking at the history of the UAE, I could run over a great long list of facts and bits of information that would take far too long and would bore you stiff. What I'd like to try to do when I'm talking about it, whether it's natural history or the history and archaeology, is that. I like to try to find bits of information that when you give it or when you show it, people will say, wow, really? I didn't know they had that in the UAE or that about the UAE. Things that will make you surprised and sit up. Now, I'm going to deal a little bit with issues related to trade and innovation ideas, which are three fundamental aspects of UAE history over the past 125,000 years. But first, I just want to say something about the paleontology, which is before man. And this picture and the ones that follow are from Natural History Museum artists of the images of late Miocene fauna 5-6 million years ago, when what is now the UAE was a bit like the savannas of East Africa. And we had ancestors of horses. That is a saber-toothed cat. That is a hippopotamus. And that is the jaw of a hippopotamus. And that is an elephant. That we had two kinds of elephant. Elephants in Arabia? Yes, we had 6 million years ago, but two kinds of elephants. One had that lower jaw, the tusk curved down, and the other kind had 4 tusks, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. They left footprints. Okay, that is a fossilized trackway. It's one of the longest and best preserved trackways of ancient mammalian fauna from the Miocene period anywhere in the world. You don't think of the UAE as being a great place for fossils, for paleontology. Our geology is wrong for dinosaurs. But from the period 5 to 8 million years ago, the best exposures and the best collections of terrestrial mammals anywhere in the world can be found in the UAE. So that is the footprints. And to the right, that is the excavation of a 1.93 meter long elephant tusk that is soon to go on display, I hope, in the new Zayed National Museum in Abu Dhabi. So we have made our mark on world paleontology. These animals coming out of Africa, across into Arabia at a time when the Red Sea wasn't there, and spreading across into the Asian continent. But that process of the UAE acting as a pathway, as a passage point between Africa and Asia, didn't just take place 5 or 6 million years ago. It happened up to 125,000 years ago. And this is a Paleolithic scraper from a site called Baraka in the west of Abu Dhabi Emirate. We have other sites in Sharjah Emirate where there is evidence of people 125,000 years ago who had probably come out of Africa, across the southern end of the Red Sea because sea levels were lower, stopped in the Emirates, several phases of occupation, and you know there are phases because you can do dating on the sand grains to find out when they last saw light, and there's little layers of sand between the archaeological finds in a normal stratigraphic manner. And then from the UAE, anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, moved into the Asian continent and eventually all the way to Australia. So we, the UAE, have been a pathway for the spreading from Africa into Asia of mammalian fauna and of Homo sapiens. We have played a role there that we hadn't even thought about 20, 25 years ago. But as a result of the research undertaken over the last few years or over the past couple of decades, this kind of information is now coming to light. And this is crucial in terms of the way the UAE now understands itself, that it wasn't just an isolated bit of desert on the fringe of nowhere, that it had a role to play and that it still has a role to play. I'm jumping to the Neolithic period, again, to pick up some of these wow things, all right? That is a house on the island of Murawa, west of Abu Dhabi. It was built 7,500 years ago. And that's what it looks like today after excavation. There were houses that were less sophisticated than that being built in the UAE as recently as 100, 150 years ago. It was sophisticated architectural methods being used in a way that is not found anywhere else in the Arabian Gulf at that period. But the people who built this, they weren't just fishermen, okay? Or people, hunting the odd animal. They were engaged in international trade. This is a pot that was found in that building I showed you in the last slide, that was made in Ubaid, the Ubaid civilization in Mesopotamia, again, 7,500 years ago. Murawa at the time, as it is now, Murawa at the time was an island, and so therefore they must have been able to engage in shipping up and down the Gulf. They certainly also knew how to exploit the marine resources around them. You can tell that from the analyzing the fish bones. You can find that they were harvesting fish that can be found inshore, but also harvesting bigger fish like tuna that can only be found in the deeper waters offshore. So it gives you an idea that they had a capacity to manufacture boats and to sail up and down the Gulf. But they also had interest in other aspects of life, including adornment. Now, it doesn't happen these days, but people used to be buried with jewelry around their necks. Archaeologists love a tomb that's full of adornment. On Murawa, they didn't have metal, but what they did have in the waters around were oysters. And within the oysters, from the shell of the oyster on the left, those are beads made from the shell of pearl oysters. And on the right, it is the oldest known pearl to have been used and collected by man. It dates to about 5,800 BC, again from the island of Murawa, and from a house adjacent to that one I showed you just before. The pearling industry in the UAE began then 7,500 years ago. It ended around the time, just after the Second World War, really. But over that lengthy period, the Romans talked about the pearls from the Gulf. You can see Renaissance paintings of Medicis and others with jewellery that includes pearls from the Gulf. They were a luxury item harvested by the people of the Gulf and exported to Europe from Roman times certainly onwards to the great empires of Mesopotamia in the sort of 2nd and 3rd millennia BC. So this little area of desert with a few scattered islands was producing, over 7,000 years ago, fine items like that pearl that would be in demand for over 7,000 years. I think that is an indication that the UAE had a contribution to make to world history. If you find strings of Gulf pearls today, they are worth a lot of money. I bought my late mother-in-law a couple of strings 40-odd years ago, and my daughter, who has now inherited them, is extremely grateful, because it would cost more than a year's student fees, I guess, to buy her another one. But it wasn't just things like pearls. It's not just the trade things. There was innovation, as I've said, as well, okay? And this is another first from the Emirates, okay? That's actually a date stone from a date that was picked out of a fireplace on another island from the Neolithic period, 7,500 years ago, called Delma, okay? And the reason I show it here is because carbon dating has shown that that is the oldest known evidence of man consuming date stones anywhere in the world, okay? Of course, man was consuming dates before, and no doubt will continue for another 6,000 or 7,000 years. But it is the oldest known evidence, okay? And when I talk about special things about the UAE, it's not that it didn't happen anywhere else in the world in some cases, but that as a result of the research that's taken place, the archaeological research has included an enormous amount of work by archaeologists from the UK. Sadly not from Cambridge. Let's see what we can do about that in the future. Though I gather a Cambridge archaeologist has been working on the site where that pearl came from. But you know, because of research and because we're encouraged to research, little bits of information pop up. And that's why, as Mejd will agree, an encouragement of research is so important. Moving on, this is later into the Stone Age. This is a part of a large communal burial area, 200 or 300 skeletons from about 4,500 BC to 4,000 BC, okay? Excavated by a German team in the Emirate of Sharjah, which is where Dr. Nabuda comes from. But I put it, not just because I want to show a bone or two, but because the image on the right, it shows something of the jewellery. You see at the bottom centre, you see the remains of a great big necklace, okay? Smaller beads near the teeth, and the red arrow points to a pearl that was placed upon the nose of the deceased. Okay, it's 1,500 years later than the earliest known pearl that I showed you before, but it shows you that people were valuing these items as being an important part of adornment, of jewellery, and this site actually is about 100 kilometres inland, so it's what was found offshore will be traded to people inshore. What was found inshore, inland, will be traded to those on the coast and beyond. When we first really begin to see evidence of major scale of international trade is at the time that these tombs were built. These are restored versions, but they're from about 3,200 BC on a mountain called Jebel Hafit, which is near the city of Al Ain, which was a major base for the Truslamaun Scouts, and I'm sure our veterans here will have memories of having served at Healy. This was the beginning of the UAE Bronze Age, when a second industry exploiting the UAE's natural resources got underway, which was that of mining copper. We exported copper through the Gulf and away to the Indus Valley. These are some of the things. The pot on the left was imported from the Indus Valley. The adornment on the right, probably from Iran or copied from the same kind of adornment that you'd find in Iran. Innovations 3,000 years ago, the invention of the Fallaj system that allowed you at a time of declining rainfall to tap into underground water. And these are 3,000-year-old water channels, fallages. They're still in use, that system, today. At the same time, around 3,000 years ago, these are skeletons of camels, okay, found in the desert, and these ones are dated to the Neolithic period. But about 3,000 years ago, it appears that camels were first domesticated in the UAE and surrounding areas. Again, another major innovation that allowed for major change. This is the Bronze Age site of Tel Brak. It's Bronze Age and Iron Age. And at Tel Brak, this was found, which is a seal that appears to be a lateen sail. Now, the invention of the lateen sail allowed people to tack against the wind and to cross the Indian Ocean, first shown in the UAE in the Iron Age, late Iron Age, 700-800 BC perhaps. Again, an innovation that revolutionized people's ability to travel in the Indian Ocean. Next thing is ideas. This is a temple from al-Quwain, the sun god Shams, okay, from before Islam. This is the church on Sir Baniyas, to which Mejd referred earlier on, when we had an active Christian community in the UAE before the beginning of Islam, probably around 600 AD till about 750. The dates are not precise. And we knew it was a church when we found this, and the president was delighted when we told him. The UAE talks today about being a country of tolerance, and actually in religious terms, it is tolerant. We were surprised, and I will close quickly because I know Mejd will make me do so. But when we first found this item on the left, this stunning piece of plasterwork, it's about this size, okay? Beautiful plaster cross. Some of my colleagues thought, oh, how do we tell the devoutly Muslim president of a devoutly Muslim country that we've just found a church on his private island? And I said, I think he's going to love it. He loved it so much that we received funding for the next year's excavation and the excavated for years onwards. He saw it as part of the UAE's history, this tolerance of ideas. And then we spread our wings. 2,000 years ago, I hope this is a wow to you, sailors from the UAE were reaching China, and it's there in the Chinese records. When the Portuguese raided the UAE at the beginning of the 16th century, cutting the noses off people and all sorts of other fairly dastardly acts, and built fortresses like this one at Khor Fakkan. From Khor Fakkan, the UAE was exporting horses to India. Now, some of you, you're not far from Newmarket here, some of you have seen some of the great Arabian horses. 500 years ago, we were exporting horses to India, the ancestors of today's Arabians. My closing thing, that besides the innovation and the trade and the ideas, yes, we had another impact within the region. And that was that the UAE had a power, or powers within the UAE had the ability to influence surrounding areas. This is a nice painting of the British shelling Ras Al Khaimah in 1819, when the UAE first came within the political orbit of Britain in India. And why did they bother? Why did they feel impelled to do so? Because the Al-Qawasim of Ras Al Khaimah and Sharjah, which are two of the emirates that today make up the UAE, could put over 60 big ships to sea. It's estimated they had as many as 18,000 sailors. and they could raid or engage in conflict as far away as India and East Africa. So there's a bit more to the UAE than desert and camels and sand. And 20 minutes is, even 25, is not enough for me to tell enough of the story to satisfy me. But I hope I've given you something to think about, and I hope there's a little bit of wow factor in it for you. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed coming here this evening to talk to the inaugural meeting of the Cambridge University Emirati Society. And I think it's a very important initiative because within major international academic institutions like Cambridge, I think it's important that there is more knowledge about the UAE, what the UAE has to offer in terms of its research, in terms of its environment, its history, its heritage, its development, all the interesting things that are taking place in the Emirates that aren't really known much about outside the UAE. And I think that organizations like the Cambridge University Emirati Society can help to break down that barrier of ignorance and to strip away the curtain that hides what the UAE is doing from the rest of the world. And, you know, I hope this is an initiative that we can see doing very well in Cambridge over the years to come, but also to spread around other universities inside the United Kingdom and elsewhere. Because the UAE does have a good story. It's a work in progress. The country is not perfect. It is continuing to move forward, and government is well aware of the fact there are things need to be changed, things we need to do better, new things we have to start doing. But what I've been talking about over the last few years, and I've repeated a bit of that at this talk this evening, is to try to talk about why the UAE is interesting in terms of its past. It has a trading relationship with the rest of the world that goes back for 9,000 odd years. There have been great ideas and innovations in the UAE's history for thousands of years. I mean, things that have been invented in the UAE, things that have been practiced in the UAE, the international trade relationships of the UAE that have seen people trading between the UAE and China 2,000 years ago, or the togas of the emperors of Rome were dyed in a purple color that came from seashells that were harvested in the Emirates and elsewhere in the Arabian Gulf. So there's aspects about Emirati history that I feel are interesting and challenging to present. It's often, I think, the case that people will look at the Emirates from outside and they'll think, oh, it's desert and sand and camels and oil, and when the oil, there was nothing before the oil, and when the oil runs out, there'll be nothing left after the oil. And when I talk to Emirati students in particular back in the UAE, I tell them, this is not the case. In the Emirates, we do have a history that is fascinating, and it goes back a long way. We have massive stone structures that are older than the pyramids. We invented the lateen sail that revolutionized the ability of people to sail across the oceans of the world. And it was in use in the Gulf, it seems, on the basis of archaeological studies. We were using it 1,500 years before the Portuguese adapted that and made their way around the Cape of Good Hope to get to the Far East. So we have done a lot in terms of discovery over the process of our interchange with other countries over thousands of years, developed a culture of tolerance and of exchange with others that makes up the society we have today, which is a tolerant society, and one that people from over 200 countries around the world come and live and work in the UAE. And it's quite rare in the world, and especially rare in the Middle East and the Arab world, to have that kind of tolerant, forward-looking, progressive society. So I have an enthusiasm for the UAE. I and my family have been given citizenship of the UAE. It's a country to which I've devoted over 40 years of my life, and I don't regret a minute of it. I have enjoyed the ability to contribute to the discovery of what the UAE is as a country. And I welcome the ability to come and talk about the UAE and to share my enthusiasms with audiences in Britain and elsewhere. The Cambridge University Emirati Society is a very good place for me to try to share those enthusiasms. And I wish the society well. I believe it has a great future. I believe it has a significant role to play, and I feel honoured that I've been invited to take part in its launch operation.